a preview with some of our best analysts and friends next on The Impossible State.
North Korea is the impossible state. It's a place that stumped leaders and policymakers for more than 3 decades. It has a complex history, and it has become one of the United States' top national security priorities. Each week on this show, we'll talk to the people who know the most about North Korea.
Welcome to another special episode of the Impossible State podcast. I'm your host, Victor Cha, President of Geopolitics and Career Chair at CSIS, Professor at Georgetown. It's August in Washington, D.C. Congress is out of session. Many people are on vacation, but not at the Impossible State podcast. We're keeping you updated on a very busy summer when it comes to Korea. First, the trade and tariff framework deal, and now the newly announced summit meeting to take place between President Donald Trump and South Korean President Lee Jae-myung, his first visit to Washington, D.C. since being inaugurated as president in June. Actually, in addition to today's live podcast, which is a curtain raiser to the summit, CSIS will be hosting a press briefing on the summit tomorrow, and then a special Capital Cable YouTube show and podcast after the summit assessing the results. So we have it fully covered for you on all ends from CSIS, the Impossible State, and the Capital Cable. We have 3 wonderful guests with us today to discuss this topic. Sid Seiler, a good friend of the show, as you all know, non-resident senior advisor at CSIS, former U.S. policymaker as well as intelligence official on the Korean Peninsula. Bill Reinsch, our Scholl Chair Emeritus, and one of our experts when it comes to everything related to trade and tariffs at CSIS and on Korea. And Timothy Martin joining us live from Seoul, Bureau Chief for the Wall Street Journal, also a good friend of the show. Thank you, all 3 of you, for joining us on short notice and in August when many of you are on vacation.
Thank you, Victor.
So let me start with Tim, since you're in Seoul. I guess the first question for you, Tim, is how should we be thinking about this summit meeting from the perspective of Korea? How is the summit being viewed in Korea? What are the expectations? And then also, one of the most important things, Sid and I have spent a lot of time arranging these things for past presidency summit meetings. And the chemistry between the 2 leaders, the personal chemistry, is something that staffers are always looking to establish, especially if the leaders are meeting for the first time. What are your thoughts on whether these 2 leaders, they're quite different, but whether these 2 leaders will be able to get along?
On the ground here, I think you can feel some nerves and jitters. Lee Jae-myung, as you had mentioned, Victor, took office only a few months ago. He's still inside his first 100 days. And it feels like his presidency so far has been building to this moment next week where he goes to the White House and meets President Trump. Now, they have held a single phone call, and according to what I've heard, they got along quite well. So politically, they sit on opposite ends of the spectrum, but they do share some common points. And that was a focus from the South Korean side to try and develop this rapport with President Trump. Obviously, they've both faced any amount of political turmoil. They've had assassination attempts against them. There have been plenty of strife from outside their party, within their party, legal challenges. So I think on a human level, they both like golf. I should also mention, though no time for a round, I'm told by my Seoul contacts, this at least on this trip. But I think a big focus of this upcoming summit will be really just that, sort of trying to establish a personal dynamic between the 2 leaders. This is the most important relationship for Lee Jae-myung in South Korea at this very moment. Now, I think how should the U.S. think about this? I mean, unfortunately, I think I have more abstraction than absolutes. We know the topics that'll be on the table, from security to tariffs, some shipbuilding discussion, investments, but really another pillar of this summit will be the details. We have the broad strokes. How will the two leaders, once we determine if they can get along, how will they hash out the particulars? And I think that's what people both inside South Korea and outside South Korea will have a close eye on.
Also, let me just follow up with you, Tim. As we know, before President Lee comes to Washington, D.C., he's visiting Japan. And what are the expectations there with regard to South Korea in terms of the visit with Japan? I think from a U.S. perspective, I don't know if Sid would agree. I don't think there's any issue with the South Korean president going to Japan. In fact, they probably like that. Certainly would like it a lot more than if the South Korean president were to go to Beijing first. That would not go over well. But what are the expectations there in Korea with regard to the meeting with Ishiba?
I think this is seen in two ways. One, actually, there was a decent amount of diplomatic gesturing toward this. This is, I believe, the first time a South Korean president has gone to Japan first, then the U.S. Now they're back-to-back trips. But that was symbolic of the priority that Lee Jae-myung is placing on the relationship with Tokyo, because before the election, and perhaps even during, what would happen between South Korea-Japan ties was a big concern by certainly people in the West. Would that hold up the test of time? So I should also mention, at the same time that President Lee is going to the White House, we learned, I believe today, that South Korea is also sending a delegation to Beijing. So I think that'll be a backdrop for a lot of these conversations. How does the three-way relationship with Japan and the U.S. hold up? But also, how does President Lee see the relationship between South Korea and China?
Great, thanks so much. And there are some other questions I want to follow up on, but let me go now to Bill. So we have this trade framework agreement that was just recently announced. Still a lot of details to be filled in. I guess one question I wanted to ask you, but I mean, we can certainly talk about what are some of the things that you expect to come out of this meeting, and feel free to offer those. But I want to ask you, like, how do you think that Trump looks at the Korea deal in the context of all these other, deals that they've been negotiating? Where do you see this sitting? How is it similar and different from some of the other deals that we've seen the United States cut with other countries? And again, what do you expect to see on the economics, trade, and investment side coming out of the meeting next week?
Well, they seem to be falling into kind of groups. If you look at them, there was the EU and the UK, which had a lot of similarities. The Southeast Asian nations, which had minor differences, but a lot of similarities between the two, between the various agreements. Keeping in mind, of course, we don't have any texts for any of these except for the UK. And a joint summary statement with Indonesia. So pinning down the details is really going to be I think, the main economic task of the summit. I think for Trump and actually for Korea, I think there's a constant need for parity with Japan, and I think Trump saw it that way. I think that once the Koreans realized that their hope of getting sort of across the board exceptions for everything based on their substantial investment in the United States, once they realized that wasn't going to happen, I think their next objective was, well, we can't be worse than Japan. We have to get at least the same, and better would be nice. And it turned out the Trump administration was sensitive to that, and I think that was sort of the driving force. Let's try to, treat people in the region that are sort of they're not, in Trump's mind, they're kind of the same. I mean, I'm sure the Japanese and the Koreans wouldn't agree that they're the same, but I think he looks at it that way. And they ended up pretty much the same, 15%. And to me, the goal of the summit is going to be exactly what you said, which is to iron out the details, because there are a number of areas where there was subsequent disagreement over what was agreed to. Rice and beef were the two that stood out, where the Korean government said they're out and the Trump administration said they're in, as far as duty-free treatment is concerned. And I think there are probably other cases like that haven't made the news. And then the last one is the investment, the 350 billion. Uh, that has been There's been a lot of skepticism about these investment announcements. In the case of other countries, is it real money? Will it be real money? Can the various governments actually force that to happen? Because it's, for the most part, private investment. What time period are we talking about? All those, and what happens if they don't meet the target? All those questions are up in the air. And I think that that's one of the main things that the summit is going to, I think, at least the Koreans side is going to want to nail down.
Um, Bill, can I ask you, particularly on the shipbuilding piece of this, there was also, in addition to the 350 billion, there was an announcement of, what was it, 100, 150 billion on shipbuilding. Um, um, this idea of make America shipbuilding great again, this slogan that the Koreans proposed really seems to have captured the imagination of the president. Um, but again, here many of the details are missing. Um, the focus is to invest in American shipbuilding capacity. Have you thought about this at all, or like how is this? And I'm going to go to Tim as well. How do you imagine this sort of happening? We know that the South Korean company has bought a shipyard. There may be others on the horizon, but how do you see this sort of thing happening? It just seems like first seems like a huge project, and certainly one that will last more than 3 years.
Well, the slogan and the emphasis on it was, I think, was a clever move by the Koreans. It is something that Trump obsesses about it. I confess, I'm a skeptic on this. That ship has sailed. I mean, the pun intended. And 50 years ago, if we had seen this coming, we could have done something about it. At this point, I think it will be very difficult to reestablish a substantial U.S. market share or market position in a market that is dominated by, really three main producers: Japan, Korea, and China. Not in that order. China's by far the biggest. Uh, it'll take massive subsidies to build the United States capability back up. If the Koreans are prepared to do that, uh, okay. But it seems to me that right now it's going to be very difficult to make competitive ships in inside the United States. But that said, it's a Trump priority, and he wants to do it. He wants to try to do it, and so making the Koreans offering to help in that regard, I think, was an important element of the deal.
Um, Sid, I'll come to you in a minute, but let me just go quickly back to Tim and ask Tim. So, Tim, I'm sure maybe you and your colleagues have written on this, but what do you see in the shipbuilding deal? Like, what are the possible avenues for this to move forward? Big number announced in the beginning, clearly lots of ambition. They got they have a nickname for it, Masca, whatever it's called now. But where do you see this going? This particular aspect of the trade deal?
Yeah, it's a tremendous amount of money. I think it's like 4 or 5x of what the entire Korean shipbuilding produces revenue every year. So I think we haven't gotten those details. This is actually part of what could be hashed out at the summit. Are the ships built here in Korea and somehow sent to the U.S.? Is this purely an expectation that the U.S., Koreans go in and buy shipyards and buy plenty of expensive machinery, modern machinery, and build the whole supplier ecosystem? We're not sure. I think a good chunk of that money could go toward making salaries more competitive, for instance, for the ship workers in the U.S. But I think one critical point here, there are sort of two elements to this. One is like the grandiose vision that probably Trump has in his mind about, yes, purely American-made ships out in the waters, there if we need them against China. But then there's this more near-term and probably more strategic concern with shipbuilding. There are a lot of American military vessels, for instance, that are waiting to be repaired, and we can see South Korea certainly help out with that.
Great. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Bill. Sid, let me come to you. So you have prepared these sorts of meetings in the past. Maybe you could start out by just giving our audience an understanding of how you go about doing that. Like, what is it that when you prepare the president for a meeting with another world leader, what are the things that you're trying to do? And then in particular, in the case of Trump and Lee, um, how do you see this? Is this going to be just, another summit, or is this going to be something transformative? Is it going to be a disaster? And what would be the metrics that you would use to determine all of that?
Victor, great questions. I mean, fundamentally, the goal of every summit is to be a political success, right? Because there's only so much you can accomplish when it comes to, we're not engaged in negotiations in great detail on a wide range of issues. There's no major issue, in fact, that brings the U.S. and ROK together this time in a way that requires the presidents to sit down and hash out something beyond what we're already seeing in public. So, with the goal of making this visit a success, we can imagine, it's being orchestrated in a way there'll be some public time for the two leaders to show the relationship that they have. I do believe the two will be able to strike it off at a certain level, or at least project an image that Lee Jae-myung is no less a viable counterpart for the United States leader than any conservative might be. So my sense is that preparing for this success and all the details on the various issues from tariffs to security issues will all be brought together for the leaders to talk, to share their impressions, and then to push it back down to the working level for implementation. Having been through 4 of these myself, and I know you went through a few, it's what we do is we reach out to the interagency, ask each of the state, defense, treasury, USDA, all the entities, what are the top issues with Korea? And of course, the embassy has a big voice in this as well, because there are troops on the front line out in Seoul. And we bring that all together and we tee up the issues where we think, one, the president can have an impact, or two, that the South Korean president is likely to raise it. So what you don't want is surprises. What you don't want is confrontation. And counter to what many might think, the more difficult issues actually may not even be raised in light of the fact that there's low likelihood that you'll resolve them in a single 90-minute meeting or ever how long they meet. Now, all of this is traditional summitry 101, and there's unpredictability with President Trump. We know that. Particularly, everybody points to the interaction with Zelensky when there was almost him and the president and vice president nearly teamed up on Zelensky. I don't think that will happen. Obviously, the dynamic is very different. I think President Trump has a respect for South Korea. I think he knows the path that President Lee Jae-myung came to office in, and so he knows that he's got a reliable counterpart. He's got a relationship that he's not going to put it out for negotiation in a way that would trouble or surprise any observer.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing I would add to that, Sid, is, many people look at this summit as they should, as a bilateral meeting between the South Korean and the U.S. leaders. But from a U.S. perspective, it's always in the context of all the other things that are going on. And of course, we just had the Alaska summit between President Putin and President Trump. Not really a big win for President
Right.
Trump. Actually, for those of you who followed Korea, it had kind of echoes of Hanoi, right? Trump walking away. They apparently didn't even have the lunch that was supposed to be scheduled between the two of them, according to some of the press reporting, not unlike what President Trump did to Kim Jong-un in Hanoi when he left the summit early, saying there was no deal here. So in that sense, the president, meaning the U.S. president, probably wants a success next week, right? He doesn't like failure to be followed by failure, so he's probably going to want some sort of success next week, and that may bode well for the meeting. In addition to the fact that the Koreans have put a lot on the table already with the 350 billion plus the shipbuilding. Sid, let me ask you, we cannot have an Impossible State podcast with Sid Seiler without talking about North Korea. And so let me ask you about North Korea. What do you think that the two leaders hoping to get out of the summit meeting when it comes to North Korea? They've had a conversation, as Tim said already, they've had a conversation, but up until this point, all the oxygen in the room was being sucked out by the concern about trade and tariffs.
Right.
And so now, obviously, that their framework has been reached. As Bill said, some of the details have to be ironed out. And this will really probably be their first opportunity to have an in-depth discussion, whether it's in the Oval or in the cabinet meeting or over lunch about North Korea. What do you expect to see there?
So, starting with the understanding that the current standoff in relations with North Korea, both with Seoul's efforts to restart inter-Korea relations and Washington's efforts to kind of restart the relationship that the president had with President Kim Jong-un going back to 2019. The current stand down, the current deadlock is all attributable to North Korean agency. They have made it clear they're not ready to engage. They'll talk with countries that will accept them as a nuclear power, but they're not interested in any dialogue in which the nuclear issue is on the table. And until countries wake up to that, as Vladimir Putin did, they're willing to go without dialogue, without negotiations. Now, that said, President Lee Jae-myung has an important centerpiece of his overall foreign policy, his overall, policy period, is his policy toward North Korea, trying to the greatest degree possible, move us back to a more kind of relaxed or a less tension than we have today, maybe going back to that 2018 time period. And it's hard to recreate 2018. There were many factors that took place as after a year, 2 years of repeated missile launches, suddenly North Korea came to the negotiating table. And multiple summits, and of course, from the U.S. perspective, Trump meeting with Kim in both Singapore and Hanoi, it was a period where things were looking positive. And to some degree, President Yi, in this first few months of office, particularly over the past couple of weeks, has emphasized trying to restore some of those confidence building measures, halting balloon launches, halting propaganda broadcasts, dismantling propaganda speakers, talking about reinstituting parts of the comprehensive military agreement. And also during his August 15th speech, making it clear that unification, in other words, regime change, unification by absorption, is not a goal of the Republic of Korea government. And there is a respect of the North Korea system. And that's where I think, there may be some points of contact with President Trump's own view. President Trump has made it clear he's willing to talk to leaders. He's willing to talk to autocratic leaders. He's willing to talk to our adversaries, because we need to develop a relationship with our adversaries if we're going to seek to try to improve their behavior. He's willing to meet at the leader level. I think President Lee Jae-myung is as well, and kind of laying out again, even if there's relative confidence that Kim Jong-un would reject anything that came out of the summit. I think the two leaders feel there'd be some political value back home, if nowhere else, to show that there's an agreement on this approach to North Korea. And in terms of respecting North Korea, I looked at the speech, and it's worth, I just tweeted something on this. It's worth going back to May 2025 and some comments that President Trump made during the Saudi U.S. investment forum in Saudi Arabia, where he basically said the United States has done nation building. We're no longer going to give you lectures on how to live. We're not going to intervene to try to change your systems. So this kind of, we're not in this to change North Korea. We can meet them as they are. We can coexist as they are. And, we can get to denuclearization maybe somewhere down the road. But, the immediacy of trying to gain some interaction with North Korea is something that I think President Trump would be comfortable in siding with President Lee on. And I think that would be a success from President Lee Jae-myung's perspective.
Great, thanks. Tim, very quickly, the the other thing that's going to be happening during the summit is the major USROK military exercise. In fact, I think it starts today.
Yeah.
How do you think that's going to play? Do you think the North Koreans are going to react to that in some way? The summit's taking place in D.C., but the exercises are happening in Korea. Do you think the North Koreans will react to that in some way?
Well, they've already been reacting long before the drill started, saying they see them as little more than war rehearsals and a military provocation. So history would suggest, and partly based on CSIS research, that North Korea will do something during these exercises. They've already done some small scale, North Korea has already done small scale exercises of their own. We could certainly see something. I don't think that would surprise anyone who's watching this.
Great, thanks. So we're at the end of our time. Let me go around for a quick lightning round and ask you all the question of so what do you think would be what do you think will be the big takeaway from the summit meeting next week? What do you expect to see on the positive side? If you have anything on the negative side as well, what do you expect to see coming out of this meeting? And you can pick any particular issue that you like. Let me start with Sid.
Yeah, so let me think of the one kind of black swan which might throw a wrench in the works here is China. If the president somehow feels that he needs to elicit some more public statements from Lee Jae-myung as a partner in countering the Chinese economic and military threat, that might put President Lee in a position that would take him beyond his current talking points, where he's still hesitating to fully orient with the United States, nor reject U.S. overtures to cooperate on China. I think across the board, on the tariff side and all the trade and economic side, the worst that can happen is there'd be no progress, but it would be passed back down to the working level for continued negotiations. On the North Korea side, I think the two leaders can go public with some language that shows a shared view of the threat, a shared view of the way forward, even if whether Pyongyang's cooperative or not.
Great, thanks. Bill, what do you expect to see?
Well, on the economic front, I think what the Trump administration will probably welcome is more clarity on the investment issues, more specificity on shipbuilding, what the money means, what's actually going to happen. And that's not impossible. I think the Koreans, will come prepared to do that. They, in turn, are going to want some commitments from the administration that what they ostensibly agreed to the last time they still sticks, that is still 15%, and that's going to apply for cars and chips and the other things where there's some ambiguity. They're going to end up also probably having the same problem the Japanese and the Europeans have had, which is how quickly will the U.S. move to actually lower the tariffs that are now higher than that down to 15%. That produced separate meetings with the Europeans and the Japanese both, and the U.S. is committed to do that with them, but hasn't done it yet. And that will probably be an ask from the Korean government as well. These are not big things. I mean, these are attainable outcomes on the economic front. So I would see happy endings there potentially.
Great, thanks. Tim.
Like President Lee's predecessor, Yoon Suk-yeol, I don't think President Lee will sing American Pie at the White House, but I am sort of curious, will there be a tick-tockable moment from this summit? On the positive framing, is there a gesture? Is there an interaction that is consumed widely? And then conversely, is there this potential for a tinderbox moment where there's an unexpected disagreement and some bombastic comments? That's what I'll be watching for.
And that's terrific. Let me add that I think on the negative side, the negative thing could be some sort of North Korean reaction to both the summit and the exercise to try to take the headlines away from the two presidents. On the other hand, that could be something that brings the two leaders together. And then the other thing I would say is on in terms of other things that we might not expect that could happen. I think we should watch the space of South Korea and their concerns about what their future is with a nuclear North Korea. In other words, what are the South Koreans or what might they ask for in terms of their own concerns? The extended deterrence sort of framework that the Biden administration set up. The Trump administration has really said nothing about that. But what will the South Koreans be asking for in that respect to try to address their own concerns about forever dealing with a nuclear North Korea. I think that's some space that we should watch. Um, Thank you again, Sid, Bill, and Tim, for joining us on the Impossible State podcast, a preview of the summit meeting 1 week from today between President Donald Trump and President Lee Jae-myung. For those of you watching from the press, CSIS will be doing a press briefing tomorrow. I don't have the time, but you can find it from our external relations media team. And then a cross advertisement for our other podcast, Capital Cable, which will happen next week after the summit meeting to assess the summit results. Also, please keep an eye out for anything that our good friends at the Wall Street Journal will be writing on this summit meeting, as well as from the Scholl chair, Bill Reinsch, as well as from the Korea chair in geopolitics with Sid Seiler and myself. So with that, thank you everybody for joining us. Hopefully this will be well, I mean, there is no vacation for the Impossible State because we'll be back in September with another episode. But thank you all for watching, and all of you enjoy the events coming up over the next week with the U.S. Korea relationship.